Good afternoon. Welcome back, everyone, from lunch. Hope you've had a good one. My name is Andrew Meredith. I'm the editor of Farmers Weekly. For those of you who don't know, it's the biggest publication for the tax-dodging, welfare-scrounging farmers across England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Hopefully not too many of my readers are here, but if they are, that was a joke so that the audience warms to me. I think it's worked. By upbringing, I'm a sheep and cattle farmer from mid-Wales. I moved to London in 2016 to work for Farmers Weekly as a reporter, and I've been editor since the beginning of 2021. And it was a real honour to be asked by the Farming and Land Use Network to labeling for the Environment, Animal Welfare and Regenerative Farming, or CLEAR, the Honorary Vice President of Pasture for Life, and also a farmer in Kent running Hereford cattle and Sleans. Hear it as CLIN too many times for my liking. Robert Fraser, who is a livestock farmer and executive director of the Real Farming Trust, which helps support people to develop a resilient agroecological farming system. And much of Robert's time is spent exploring and developing novel ways to support food and farming businesses. And then Josie Fernandez, who is campaign and policy coordinator for the Landworkers Alliance and an agroecological smallholder farmer based in Dorset, producing a wide range of products from vegetables, fruits and meats to wool blankets, juice and preserves, and probably much more. Okay. Many of you will probably in your time have had to console a friend in a difficult romantic situation and heard some version of the phrase, "I can't live with them, I can't live without them." And to me, that neatly sums up farming's ongoing disentanglement from the common agricultural policy. We are all familiar in this room, I am sure, with selective breeding traits for plants and animals, but the CAP also selectively bred our farmers in a certain way by historically rewarding production and latterly area under management. It's encouraged consolidation, stifled diversity, and while shielding food producers from volatility in some circumstances, has made many food producers and landowners reliant on those same payments and thrown up barriers to new entrants. The withdrawal of area payments by 2028 in England means a different selection pressure is going to be applied. Farmers will be both exposed to and incentivised to a greater extent to abide by market forces, for better or worse, but also are being tempted by payments for environmental actions. Of course, we all know this is happening originally because of Brexit, but 6 years have now passed since Michael Gove, then at the helm of DEFRA, published the landmark Health and Harmony consultation paper from which so much English environmental and food policy has stemmed right up to the present day, including the SFI. It was Health and Harmony that really put the phrase public money for public goods on a pedestal, the ambition to pay for actions, that is, instead of land area. And public goods in that document, which was a consultation paper rather than the finished article, was defined then as environmental enhancement, better animal and plant health, animal welfare, improved public access, rural resilience, and productivity. Very ambitious in some respects. Overriding everything was the Tory manifesto, which you may or may not remember back then, to leave the environment in a better place than it had been found. Yesterday alone, in the other place, to use parliamentary language, 50 new actions were added to SFI under Steve Barclay's announcement to be delivered across a range of different farming practices and landscapes, including grassland, moorland, lowland, peat, agroforestry, wood pasture, scrub creation, and for upland and common ground, the latter being, I'm sure, the most welcome for some folk who've been neglected so far. The updates also included an average 10% funding uplift, streamlined application processes for farmers to apply for the SFI and countryside stewardship mid-tier, and enhanced environmental incentives and support for the rollout of new technology. There is an enormous amount going on, and we are only dwelling predominantly with England today. And I think the main purpose, or one of the purposes of this conversation, will be to try and zoom out a little bit, take stock of how far we have come from that initial genesis of the ideas to now, and then where we would like to get to by 2028 or 2030. DEFRA's announcement to consult on retail labelling as well was unveiled yesterday, intending to more clearly distinguish higher animal welfare food. And this really matters, as many of you know, and our own audience research shows the end of area payments is likely to have an enormous effect. 80% of farmers surveyed by Farmers Weekly are concerned about replacing that lost income. 55% say it will be difficult to survive without it, and 3 in 10 have still not started to prepare for its absence. Bearing in mind we are halfway through a very long agricultural transition period, that is one of the statistics I find most concerning. Many are looking, which will probably be a concern to many in this audience, for future productivity gains to solve the problem that they are facing. So, as I say, we're going to discuss today what's gone well so far and for whom, and where else we need, where the gaps are and what we need to do to fill them. And as I've said already, we are going to be focusing predominantly today on the situation in England. I hope you will indulge that, and apologies to those of you from other nations in the UK and beyond. We will touch on them, but I think you will agree it would be better to have a detailed discussion on one nation than try and skate unsatisfactorily over them all, despite the different nuances. So that's definitely enough from me for now. Martin, your opening remarks, please, to kick us off.
Thank you very much. So I see myself as an asset manager of natural capital, producing a range of goods and services from the landscape I manage. In other words, a farmer. But many of those goods and services have not been rewarded in the past, and we welcomed Michael Gove's Public Money for Public Goods 6 years ago, and we have not also always seen the delivery of that. So I farm in Cambridgeshire. I'm also the Chief Exec of the Nature Friendly Farming Network, which was actually launched here in 2018. We saw a space for many farmers were not getting the support and recognition in farming in ways that you see nature and habitat and landscape in a connected way. It's not food or nature, it's about how nature enhances food production. So we created a network and launched it in 2018. We have a steering group in each country, a farmer-led, so it's a completely farmer-led organisation. So we have one in Wales, Northern Ireland, Scotland and England, and then we have a UK structure. And part of the opportunity for the network is, which is free to join for farmers as members, public as supporters and organisations, is to give the farmers peer-to-peer learning and other opportunities of seeing what other farmers are doing. Give them a support and comfort to sort of say, actually, you're doing the right stuff. And actually, this is important. And as what we have seen is what's coming forward in the way we need to farm for the future is way many farmers have farmed in the past, but they haven't been recognised for it. We're trying to, as an organisation, is make sure their voices are heard to each other and within the communities. But the other key important to make the change really happen is make sure the policy is delivered in the right way that incentivises and makes farmers get the right rewards for the outcomes we do. Many of the core costs for many farmers are maintaining the environment. Those hedgerows, stone walls and other things that previously the market price hasn't given us enough return for to really enhance, and the opportunity within England of public money for public goods and rewarding those actions was really welcomed, and we are moving slowly in that direction, not as quickly as we hoped, and the balance isn't always there. So within our organisation, we're a recognised stakeholder in each government across the UK. We get some very good access of helping shape and develop policy. Not all our asks are always engaged with, but we are seeing some really positive ways of engaging behind the scenes, sitting around tables and having conversations at all levels across government, but also externally within stakeholder groups and other opportunities. And so we do that right across the UK in the various parts. The other role we really want to play is talking to Westminster, the MPs that are formulating trade deals and budgets, and a lot of what Westminster forget. While they talk about UK, they're mainly talking about what England does, because we have devolved governments where they have their own unique powers. So we need to help the MPs. So we're helping them sort of lobby into them and communicate to them, and spend a lot of time meeting with them to try and get the right outcomes. And that's been particularly difficult the last few years with the chop and change of so many Secretary of States and ministers and people within the current government's ideological views of what's going to happen. So that's been really challenging. What we found was, by having those engagement opportunities, we were seen just as a smaller voice. And the voice wasn't always heard compared with other farming voices that seem to be a lot bigger. And when you spoke to many of those MPs, they get various briefing papers and different things, and they want a coherent single message from farmers compared with other farming voices that get given. So what we saw the opportunity for is bringing farming messages, farmers together, and we created FLUN, Farming and Land Use Network, championing voices of farmers and land managers in a practical way for politicians, MPs and lords. So we can go there collectively. So as an organisation, as FLUN, as a sort of secretariat of an organisation, focusing in how do we engage with those policymakers and MPs and peers, collectively bringing smaller farming voices together. So together we have the power to say, actually, we've got 6, 8 organisations signed up on a single document that we don't agree on everything, but these key points are what we're asking for, rather than the MPs and their staffers receiving 8 different briefs. Key within England, getting those MPs on farm, because then we have those meetings in with Westminster, it connects, they've seen it, they know what it means. When we talk nature-friendly farming, what does that mean to an MP? But when they've been on a farm and seen it actually, so Mary's standing at the back there, she's our MP engagement officer for the Nature Friendly Farming Network. So if anyone wants help engaging with their MPs or the potential MPs that are coming, we've got capacity to help facilitate that, because it's really important to get those that are making the decisions that affect farming, to get them on farms, to really ground that down and make it work. So the future opportunity is really challenging. The opportunity to engage, we know we have an election coming up, and actually the next year or two is going to be critical to actually prop up the stuff that hasn't been done. We know a lot have been produced, but it isn't delivering the stuff we really need to do to make our food system work, our trade deals work. I was lucky enough to host Michael Gove, the Secretary of State at the time, a few years ago, when he was filmed on our farm saying we're not going to allow imports below our standards. What's going to happen? So that completely underpins what we do as farmers, and we need that baseline, and there's a whole load of stuff we're going to have to see the future government deliver. And also, the future government is going to govern up to 2030 almost, where we're meant to have halted species decline by 2030, met many of the climate targets. We have 5 years to do a pretty significant change, and as farmers, we need that information. We must share that to farmers, because we need to invest in the things that work in the future, not the things that work now, because much of the investment that's happening today actually will be stranded in years to come, because it's the wrong sort of farming system that does for nature, for climate, for public goods. So it's about how do we come together, and the opportunity of FLUN and this session is collectively as organisations, farming organisations and voices, we can have more power together and be more influential and actually be respected of, there's a whole, thousands of farmers coming together rather than many small groups. And that power has been seen to be really effective, and we need to do a lot more in the years ahead, in the next few years ahead. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin.
Hello, everybody. I'm mainly going to talk about CLEAR, which is the labelling campaign that I chair. But before I get onto that, I just want to mention Pasture for Life. I was a board director for 8 years and chairman for some of those years. And I think, as an organisation, we really welcome this initiative by NFFN, because we, as a small organisation, cannot do everything. And one of the things that we haven't had resources to do is to do really consistent parliamentary lobbying. In many ways, I feel that hasn't mattered, because, as Martin has said, it's been such an impossibly difficult environment in which to lobby parliamentary-wise. Perhaps it hasn't mattered, but it's really great that we can start to feed in to activities that FLUN can do, and basically it's a way of sharing resources. It's part of this thing about building a movement, which I think is so important. Over the last day and a half in this room and throughout Oxford, we've heard amazing things that people are doing for food and farming, and we are all, everybody here is part of the movement. And the real challenge is to try and get policy and government to catch up with what we're doing and to start implementing things that I personally feel that if we had the right policy, we could snowball all these amazing activities, but it's like pushing water uphill. You know, it's really, really hard work. So we're only too glad, Martin, to leave it to you to do that. But I think the business about getting farmers, MPs out to farmers is really important, and Pasture for Life farmers would be delighted, I know, to host MPs onto their farms. So just moving ahead a little bit, and talking about policy, I want to tell everybody in this room about CLEAR and why I think that labelling is actually incredibly important. Many people would feel it's not important, but I want to try and get across the message that it is actually really important, and it's really key to us moving forward as a regenerative agroecological movement, however we want to describe ourselves. So when we left Europe, and the UK had to introduce the Agriculture Act in order to bring agriculture policy into the UK. So in 2020, the Agricultural Act came into being, and there was a little clause in that which said that the government was going to review its marketing and labelling regulations in order to ensure there was better fairness, more transparency and clarity in the supply chain. Now, we at Pasture for Life were really, really pleased to see that, because one of our big political asks has been that at the moment you can describe your meat or dairy as grass-fed if it's just predominantly grass-fed. That means 51%. The other 49% can be absolutely anything. So it could actually almost come from a feedlot. So long as that animal is fed for 51% of its life on grass, you could still describe it as grass-fed. It's totally meaningless. It means that we, as farmers who are producing 100% grass-fed, have no place in the market. The market can't distinguish us unless we sign up to being certified Pasture for Life, which I highly recommend anyone who's doing 100% grass-fed beef should do. But there's tremendous unfairness, and the consumer, we did a survey, said it was totally misleading. Nobody thought that if they bought grass-fed meat, it would only mean 51%. So this little clause came in, and we thought, well, this is our chance to have a government everyone's fresh, you know, out of Brexit, lots of new ideas and ability to do things. So we could perhaps make mileage on the grass-fed definition thing, but actually it was part of a much bigger picture of a lack of transparency in labelling. And so we went to our food, farming and civil society organisation friends and said, would you like to join with us to campaign for better labelling across the board in food? And we'll set up a consortium so we can be the voice of agroecology in the discussion that should be taking place with government, having said they're going to do the labelling regulations. So CLEAR came into being incredibly quickly. Immediately 40 organisations signed up, we got some funding, and we were ready to go. We set up a manifesto, ready to go to have the discussions which the government had said they were going to have. In the event, in the last 3 years, practically nothing has happened on labelling, and it's partly because, as Martin said, the constant political shenanigans that have been going on. So we haven't made any real progress at all, but we have actually made lots of links into DEFRA. Last year, the government set up what they've called the Food Data Transparency Partnership, which is a good move. The aim of that partnership is to bring together all the different departments that deal with labelling and ostensibly to bring together all the stakeholders that are involved in labelling. Now, I would say that the main stakeholders, one of the main stakeholders in labelling, must be the people who grow and produce the food. But we're not included on the overarching board that they have. That board is made up almost entirely of the large food manufacturers. So the labelling discussions that are taking place are starting from the top and coming down. And we think this is incredibly dangerous because they're going to start labelling. There's a movement, there's already progress to introduce eco-labels, and those will be based on global synthesised data. So all beef producers will be given the same score regardless of how they produce their beef. All tomato producers will be given the same score regardless of how they produce their tomatoes. It's an incredibly blunt instrument, and by definition, an average disadvantages the best producers and advantages the poor producers. So actually what could happen if this takes place is it drives farming at that very high, big level. And let's face it, the vast majority of people in this country, in the whole world, are buying their food from the large food manufacturers in supermarkets. They're not all of us in this room. They're people who don't have the opportunities that we have to perhaps access short supply chains. So we're really, really worried about this approach and have been pressing the government to include us on the Food Data Transparency Partnership. In the last day, as Andrew said, we've heard an announcement that they're going to go back to labelling. And at a meeting we had yesterday with the Minister, he said that what he wanted to do was to deal with the unfairness in the supply chain and allow, for instance, his example he chose was for a Cotswold chicken pie, for whoever buys that pie, to know where everything's come from. That is brilliant. That's what we want. We want that for data from the farms to be driven up through into labelling and for it not to be top down. Now, I'm not sure, there's been various press releases and as a producer myself, a letter from DEFRA about what their labelling details, what they're proposing. The details are absolutely not clear. You could be totally cynical and say that one of the things that they're actually, the only thing they're aiming to achieve at the moment is they've so messed up on their trade deals, which has meant that we have got coming into this country lots of cheap imports with very poor animal and other animal welfare and other credentials. And the consumer's beginning to realise that they're buying products, they have no idea where they came from, what's gone into them, and the government is basically having to clear up its own mess by their proposals in this labelling thing. That may be too cynical, and I hope it is, and I also hope, if there's anyone from government sitting in here, that they will include us as stakeholders in a genuine way and not just consult us and then make their own decisions. We should be on the decision-making body as to what data and information goes into labels from now on. So that's my bit.
Thank you, and I'm sure there'll be some questions on that, given the topical nature of it in particular later. But now, over to you, Robert.
Thank you. So you asked me to talk a little bit about the work of the RFT, and I'll do that very briefly before I talk a little bit more about my reflections as a livestock farmer on marginal land in the Welsh Marches. And I must admit that at the RFT, we prefer to try and enable change from the ground up through amazing events like this, which is an incredibly powerful vehicle for change itself, rather than from the top down, because if we wait for government, then nothing is going to happen. Policy work has been extremely difficult and frustrating over the last 6 years due to political instability, and I must recognise I'm very grateful and full of admiration for the work of Martin and Fidelity and Jyoti for the effort and energy and time they put into trying to engage with policymakers and parliamentarians. It is important work. So at the RFT, we have of course, tried to support the transition to agroecology from the top down. We used to be the secretariat for the APPG for agroecology, but we felt that was getting very bureaucratic and difficult to enable change. So we've changed that to a new group called Parliamentarians for Agroecology, which works with organisations like the Farming and Land Use Network and other small NGOs and organisations in our sector to provide them access to parliamentarians in Westminster and civil servants in Whitehall. We feel it's a much sort of a new, fresher approach to advocacy, which better links the land use sector with active parliamentarians. But Fidelity and Martin are right. We all need to work together because we're all very small organisations. So the other thing that we do is we have the Agroecology Comms Network, and we feel that that is also very important to coordinate the communications of the different organisations working in our sector, because we all have different campaigns. So that is getting going again this year, and we've got a very active programme of events, which is very exciting. And another programme, just very briefly, which is close to my heart, is our funding programme called LEAP. So we recognise from running this conference for many years that funding is an issue, and it's even more acute now. So we set up a programme to support the type of businesses that come to this conference, to provide them with a mix of loans, grants, and business advice and support. And that's called LEAP, and it's open at the moment for applications. So if you want to get involved with any of those initiatives, please visit our website at realfarming.org. But I just wanted to reflect a little bit on my experiences as a livestock farmer, a first-generation livestock farmer. I started farming in 2003 in a very marginal and wet, boggy area of Herefordshire. And I opened the conference by saying that farming is a profession of hope. And my goodness, you need hope, don't you, to be a farmer? But looking back at the Health and Harmony report, it stated, and I quote, "We recognise that upland farmers are often more dependent than most on direct payments. Upland farmers will be well placed to benefit from our new environmental land management system, and we will reward farmers for the public goods that they provide." Now, I'm afraid to say that for me and many of my neighbours, we haven't seen that commitment from the government, and the future now is incredibly uncertain. We've had 6 years of uncertainty, and the new schemes are under-resourced, especially for marginal and upland livestock farmers, and especially for tenants and those outside protected landscapes. We have been offered very little to replace the lost BPS, and to be honest, and it saddens me to say this, but trust is in pieces with upland farmers and the government at the moment. This is not a good place to be 6 years into the agricultural transition. For many upland, or as they were called, less favoured area livestock farmers, SFI currently replaces less than 35% of their basic payment scheme and has higher costs of delivery for the farmer. I read about one farmer recently where that figure was 8%. Many farmers are looking for part-time work, and applications for financial support to wonderful organisations like the Addington Fund have gone up 244% in the last few months. And many like me, who have been farming in a nature-friendly way for a long time, feel forgotten and penalised for going green too soon, with the initial focus of SFI being primarily on arable and lowland farms and improved pasture. So we find a situation where we have perverse incentives, where it actually would make more sense for me, more financial sense for me, to plough up my ancient meadows and reseed it with diverse herbal lays. And of course, I'm not going to do that. So it seems to me like cheap food on the one hand and nature recovery on the other are being demanded on a shoestring. And the result of this is that the government risks delivering the opposite of what was intended, especially in marginal and upland areas. There are, of course, some very good examples of low-input, greener, agroecological, nature-friendly farms. But I would be lying if I said that this is what my neighbours are planning. Most have no intention of embracing SFI. There is just no incentive to do so because the payment rates have been so low. And even if they do, they need to replace the lost BPS, which cannot be 100% replaced with the sustainable farming incentive. So I've spoken to a lot of my neighbours, and their business plan is therefore to push the land harder, to intensify and scale up as far as they can. Land rental values are increasing, buoyed by high livestock prices and the desire to secure more land. Fields have been reseeded with ryegrass, and I'm on a very marginal, sloped area in the uplands. And for the first time in my valley, I'm seeing turnips and root crops being planted on valley sides, leading to bare soil over the winter and terrible problems with our river. So my worry, over and above the fact that this is a backward step for nature and a challenge to the agroecological transition, is that scale, simplify, and magnifies the weaknesses in any business plan. Without continued high livestock prices, I worry many will fail. You need to be a top third producer to make it pay, with good genetics, good infrastructure, low overheads, secure tenure. And it's impossible for new entrants and anyone who has to rent land or has a mortgage to get access to the sector. And I think many will retire and leave the sector. I also worry about policies that separate nature from food. Much more needs to be done to support nature-friendly farmers, pasture-fed farmers, agroecological producers, and marginal upland livestock farmers and their communities. As it stands, the funding simply is not there to support an agroecological transition at scale, and this lack of funding is particularly acute for upland and marginal livestock farmers and new entrants and tenants. The schemes are highly complex, and I think free advice is needed to farmers to embrace the sustainable farming incentive. I think that is critical. I genuinely believe that we can and should produce ways in which that deliver more nature, but it needs more targeted support. We need to look at it holistically, look at the whole farm. It needs proper funding and more integrated policy making. And it needs trust. And I'm afraid at the moment none of those things really exist, certainly in my community. And I think that's been exacerbated by successive DEFRA secretaries with little interest in the brief. Can things be turned around? Well, I sincerely hope so, and there were some welcome announcements yesterday from the Secretary of State for more money into the Sustainable Farming Incentive. And obviously we need to start engaging with Labour about their agricultural policies. We need more options and more funding for SFI in upland areas and accelerated implementation. And we need better payment rates. We need more funding for rural development, and I'd really like to see a farming and protected landscape scheme for less favoured areas, because the FIPL was actually quite successful. And we need more farmers to engage with the Sustainable Farming Incentive and the government, as I feel if we don't embrace the funding that is available, then we risk losing it forever. So that is really important, and which is why I say that I think advice to farmers is really, really important. You know, at the moment, you need to pay somebody £1,500, £2,000 to give you the advice that you need to be able to engage with these schemes in the best way possible for your farm. I think the government should be providing that advice to encourage uptake into these schemes. So I've got some ideas about solutions as well, but I'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you. Jyoti, your opening thoughts.
Hello. Yeah, I'm Jyoti. I'm Campaigns and Policy Coordinator for the Landworkers Alliance. And as you may know, we're a part of La Via Campesina internationally, representing 200 million farmers around the world. And there's a clear philosophical approach we take towards supporting farmers, which is based in the right to food. And that government has a responsibility to provide for basic human rights. And through that approach, with the right to food approach, we think of farming and farmers as the providers of that basic human right. And so within that, the responsibility to ensure that everyone has access to healthy, affordable food is a public good. Food security is a public good. Food in and of itself is not a public good. It can be bought, sold, and traded, but food security is an equitable access to healthy, well-produced, high animal welfare food that provides for biodiversity and all the things that we need to come from the food production system are public goods. And so when farmers are supported in producing this food, they need to be ensured a dignified livelihood, that they are able to continue to support their families by producing this food. It shouldn't be a thing of shame that it's something that's supported. You know, through the NHS, for the right to health, we support our doctors and our nurses, not well enough, but we do support them to provide for that health care. Through the education system, you support teachers to be able to provide for that basic human right. And so, therefore, within providing for the right to food, it is okay to support farmers, and it is a good thing to do. I'm not in any way suggesting that the way that it was coming from the CAP, from Europe, was the correct way to be supporting farmers. That's why we lobbied so hard to change that system, which is distributing payments on the basis of how much acreage you owned. That was a distorted system and not putting in the right place. But government should be putting a lot of effort into creating the right market forces in order to guarantee a fair livelihood for farmers to be able to produce the food that we all need. And that comes through taxation, it comes through regulation, high regulations on standards, whether it's animal welfare or pesticide usage, so it levels the playing field. It comes through looking at our trade system to make sure we're protecting farmers from cheaper imports that are undercutting fair prices. It comes from a wide variety of different mechanisms. And I was meant to be talking here about supporting new entrants, and I'll tell you, we had a roundtable with Mark Spencer last year with many of our young farmers who wanted to get access to land to produce the food we need. I mean, beautiful, beautiful people willing to put, you know, their life into producing the food for our society and their communities. From FLAME, the youth branch of Landworkers Alliance, but also from National Farmers Union, Young Farmers Clubs, all there with Mark Spencer saying the same thing in the room. They want to produce food for our communities. They want to look after the soil and biodiversity crisis and reverse that. All of them across the board, not just landworkers and the agroecological movement, but all the young farmers as well. And the number one thing that they said they needed is to know that they would have a viable livelihood taking on this occupation, that they can support themselves and their next generation with farming. And so that's the number one thing. We have to think about how government does that responsibly and takes that responsibility on. It cannot be left to the market alone. So that's one part of it, and definitely looking at the trade, looking at how the subsidy system works, and improving ELM so that the payments that are replacing what was taken away are adequate to adequately support farmers through the transition with all of the support mechanisms in place, whatever it is, whether it's capital grants, training and advice, and adequate payment rates. They need to be done so that farmers don't go out of business in the transition to producing food in the way we need to produce it. That has to happen. Otherwise, we're not going to have food production, and we're not going to have young farmers going into the sector. Then, if we're going to support new entrants very specifically, we have to recognize that they're entering into a really dangerous industry in many ways. There's a lot of uncertainty there. There's more free trade agreements being struck all the time, which means more and more and more risk of being undercut by cheaper imports from other places. And that means that there is support that needs to be given to young people entering the industry to get the training that they need so that they know how to farm well. And that needs to be supported through a kickstart scheme, apprenticeship schemes, and paid visits to other farms. So farmers are paid to get young farmers there to learn how they're farming from them. And then a capital grant scheme. And sometimes when you present this to government, they say, well, we'll just give them business advice. You can't give business advice for something that's trying to operate in a really broken sector already, right? But enough business advice is not going to make it work. They actually need support, financial support, to be able to get started, especially if you're not inheriting a farm or you don't come from a wealthy background. And if we're really going to try and get food accessible to all parts of our society, then we need that support for those farming businesses to get launched. That's support in access to land, and whether that's through land cooperatives or helping people get started through grants, or to buy land, or to enter into a farming business on somebody else's land. That support needs to be there, and for all the equipment they need to get started. And then we need to really think about supporting the horticulture sector, because one of the big problems with the way the subsidy system to this point has been configured is because it's based on the area of land you own. Much support goes to the livestock sector and to the arable sector, not enough, but much support goes to that, but it does not go to the horticulture sector. It's less than 1% of the funding that's out there goes to the horticulture sector, people producing fruit and veg. And if we're really going to have diets more in alignment with healthy food, with all of the objectives we have of connecting people to seasonality of food, and also with the climate crisis, with changing our diets so people eat more fruit and veg and less animal-based products, then we need to support the horticulture sector more. And right now they're looking at reducing the eligibility requirements so that there's no minimum threshold for land, so that people who weren't previously eligible for BPS can get these payments. But in reality, even if those producers that might have 3 hectares of land and have a really intensive market garden that's delivering fresh fruit and veg to the village, apply for the SFI scheme and they get £15 a hectare, that's like 45 quid. 45 quid is not going to support the viability of a market garden or a CSA, and it's hardly worth applying, really. And so it's great that we managed to campaign for this removal of the eligibility requirement. I think that's a big win. The Landworkers Alliance, the CSA network, and other organizations have been campaigning for this for a while. But we need a bespoke horticulture scheme where horticulture producers are supported not only to get started up with capital grants for when they start, but an ongoing annual payment that supports the really good work that they do. That can be done in many different ways, and we're looking at different ways it can be done across Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and England. It can be through a flat rate payment per year, and in some ways we're saying the average payment to most farmers is around $20,000 to $22,000 a year. Some sort of flat rate payment like that supports extra employment. Or it can be income support scheme for horticulture growers, around $15K a year, and support for employees. Or it can be specifically standards within countryside stewardship or in SFI that support agrobiodiversity work, public engagement work, work on just producing fruit and vegetables that can be distributed to low-income communities, all the kind of good things that we can get through community-engaged production of fruit and vegetables. So, that's just one example. That's in the horticulture sector. And across all the different food products that we need to be able to support ourselves, government needs to be thinking strategically, how do we do this? How do we make sure everyone has healthy food that's there for this generation and the next generation, and stand up and say, we are prepared to do our public duty in feeding everyone healthy, affordable food.
Thank you very much, and I'm not sure anyone had noticed your microphone was off. That was brilliant.
Sorry.
Yeah. Passionate, not loud, not loud. Each of you, in different ways and in different topic areas, have articulated very eloquently a problem that needs fixing. But I want to have a discussion before we open it to the floor. I want to get a bit grubby. I think a lot of people find thinking about change and the requirement to acquire and use power a bit distasteful, and they would rather someone else does it. That's the first problem. Secondly, we can get quite paralysed by the scale of the problem and not know where to act initially. And thirdly, I think the political process, if you're thinking about top-down change, the incremental nature of it can be extremely frustrating. So I would like to hear examples from each of you of how you think change can be effected in a practical way that people in the audience can contribute to. Is it through supporting an organisation like those represented on stage? Is it through joining a political movement? Is that a way to effect change in the farming context? Is it something completely different? So who would like to go first on that? Fidelity.
You've really invited us to a shameless bid by asking that question. And so I would say that I think one of the best things that people could do to support, and I'm actually talking now about philanthropists, is to support organisations that are supporting others to make the change. So in the case of Pasture for Life, we've set up mentoring schemes. We have 1,000 members, and the best things that we're best at is helping farmers through change and supporting them and learning off each other. And I mean, I've learned so much through my colleagues at Pasture for Life, but that needs an organisational setup that needs financial support, and frankly, we can get a certain amount from membership fees, but not enough. And so I think any philanthropist in this room should definitely look at supporting those organisations. And whilst I've been given the floor, I'd just like to say that CLEAR, as a setup which we have got 40 organisations sitting underneath us. Labelling is not a very exciting thing to be campaigning on. People don't really understand it, but it is so critically important. We actually find it really difficult to raise funds, and we are looking for funds at this moment in time. So if anyone wants to support us financially, we'd be absolutely delighted. And then, of course, you can join campaigns, but I think you should never forget the role of those organisations in supporting everybody underneath them who's doing such brilliant work.
So money is definitely power.
Yeah.
You probably knew that. But also being across the detail and being the person that the stakeholder, the first stakeholder that government or someone picks up the phone to. You've been known. Martin.
Yeah, I think it's trying to understand who holds the power. Is it a private market? Is it money? Is it that? So how do we activate them? So that may be a social movement and a publicity movement to make them be shamed into doing something or see they need to do something. Is it a control within Parliament? And is it this? Is it a Westminster Parliament, a devolved government, or is it an international government? The UN or something else. So I think what we try and do is try and understand where we can have control and opportunity and engagement. So if it's within Westminster, how do we have one within the network? We've come up with a manifesto, which will be on our website hopefully next week, so go and have a look at that. But it's having clear asks for the parties. And the election is this coming year, but the parties have already doing their manifesto, and from what I understand, we've got to the end of the month to influence it. So no point coming up in a few months' time and saying, parties, we want you to do this, but also we have to understand their manifestos will be quite top line and actually won't do the detail, particularly as it looks like we're going to have a Labour government coming in who are very small as a party with very minimal resources. They are not getting into the detail until they get into government, where they use the government machinery to do the detail. So for me, it's about identifying who holds the control. How do we do a campaign? When are the opportunities? If it's a policy, when is there going to be an announcement 6 months, 12 months' time? How do we become I look at our role as a critical friend to those that hold power. We need to go in there and be supportive, but be very critical where we need internally. And if that's not working, we do it externally as well, and manage to drive the change that way around. And that's the pure role of FLUN, is making sure we all go around with similar asks. We all are trying to get access to ministers and MPs, but if we're all going in with 10 different asks, they're going to sit there and think, what the heck? But if we can distill that down and say, right, these are 10 key points we want to get. One organisation can hit these because that's their role. If it's labelling, CLEAR should be there, and we should be there to support them. And we need to define that out, because critically, we need to come together as mass to make the difference. But politics is wonderful when you look at it. They are constantly trying to pick each other off and divide everybody, because it quietens the place down. The only way to make change is to come together at strength.
Josie, the Landworkers Alliance have already written their manifesto.
That's right.
Did you shoot for the moon, or did you try and be a bit more incremental, because sometimes that is a better way to see some improvement?
So, if anybody would like one, we've made a food and farming manifesto with critical asks, and we do request that if people believe and support those, that they actually get a copy of the manifesto, make an appointment with your MP, any politicians that you can talk to about that, talk to them. And we will be running political trainings over the next month. If you want to jump on a Zoom call and ask as many questions about the asks as you can, I can help, back up that support, so that you can feel confident to speak to your politicians. Like Martin said, there's about a month before parties are getting their manifestos together, but then it's still on an ongoing basis. And I really recommend you do that, and that you go direct, you invite the MPs to your farm or to your project, or even to your home for a bit of food to talk about things, because that really, really works, right? And when you're saying about shooting from the moon, what we decided to do was think about what's politically expedient for us to ask for, because we also have to be quite realistic. And we're working from the Right to Food framework, which luckily, if it is Labour Party that gets into office, they do operate from a rights-based framework. So we're starting from a ground where there's a clear level of understanding between where we're operating from. And then thinking about what's high visibility, where are they going to gain political points in adopting the policies that you're putting forward, ones that are easy to implement, relatively low cost, or even make money. Things like tariffs or regulation, they actually make money for government. They don't cost money. What will be very politically popular that you can put into place. So things like a new entrant scheme. If you're a new entrant and you talk to them and say, hey, the younger generation is really passionate about food justice. More and more young people want to eat healthily. They want to eat fresh fruit and veg. They want to be able to go to their local organic farm, particularly an urban farm, and find out where their veg grows from and get engaged in doing that public awareness and contact with nature and things. So, if you put a scheme together and gave $2 million, which is nothing to government, to a new entrant scheme, what political points would you gain? There would be a little sign on there that would be very, very visible to the public. The younger generation would be putting out Instagram posts. It's really politically expedient for government to adopt that kind of scheme. And they can think about that and go, woo, that's a good political win. Or public procurement. If every school started to procure from producers, local producers, and there was healthy food available to every school child, that's a high political win, because that's really visible, but it's supporting our producers. And, the Labour Party have actually already committed to looking at public procurement. So these kinds of things, think about the ask and think about why they might want to adopt them. And that's, we've made some choices there. But, think about how you can present them and entice them into supporting what we want.
Many people in the audience would agree that with you when you said there was a lack of trust in the various well, array of DEFRA Secretaries of State from the Conservative Party we've had, do you think if there is a Labour government in England within the next 12 months, do you hold out hope that they will begin to rebuild that process, or will it be more of the same?
Ooh, difficult question. Difficult question. I mean, I think there is some hope. I mean, I do feel a little bit better today than I did yesterday. And I think the increased funding into the SFI and the new options are to be, we should congratulate the government for doing that, quite honestly. And I think Labour do get certain things, but the detail of their manifesto is very unclear at the moment. And there's obviously going to be severe pressures from the Treasury to where they focus their money, because we've got social care issues, we've got NHS issues, education, etc. So it's very difficult, which I think it's really important that farmers do embrace the system as it is and get involved, because if we don't use it, if it's only 5%, 10% of farmers that have embraced it so far, then we are at significant risk of losing that funding. So all farmers, please get involved in the schemes as they are. They're not ideal, but get involved with them. So I think Daniel Zeichner and others, they do get it, and it's encouraging to see things like wanting to encourage more cooperatives, more community businesses, and I think that is a key way forward as well. I think we need to work together, basically, either as a cooperative or as farmers, just working together, supporting each other, supporting our organisations, getting involved with the Nature Friendly Farming Network, becoming a member of the LWA, the PFLA. These are all very important things. Get political and get angry, maybe. Because, we're in a bit of a state here. Get involved. Don't just assume that everything will be okay with an incoming Labour administration. We need to keep pushing and keep pushing hard.
And final point then on our future government farming programme before we open to the floor, and I'll start with you, Martin, but seemingly every green NGO and farming lobby organisation has asked for more money for food and the environment. Could we see, first of all, is that likely? And could we see an even bigger alliance than FLUN, perhaps a lot of organisations coming together to really put the pressure on for that ask?
So I think as farmers, we need to be really clear in what we're delivering, what the value of it is. Because currently, Treasury doesn't see the value. We had an area-based, we're moving to an action-based and various actions. We need to embrace that, we need to deliver, and we need to demonstrate how much further we need to go and the investment that is needed. Government will need to chip in to some of that, but so will the supply chains. The impact some of our food contracts are having a devastating effect in our landscape here and abroad. We need that clear labelling system and approach. We cannot go ask for more money without demonstrating the value of what we're doing, because if you look at the NHS, the schools and all the other calls on the Treasury, we're got to be up against that. When we were in the EU, that was over there. Now we've got to go to Treasury with a clear ask of demonstrating what we need. So we need to step up, deliver, engage, and then prove. And that's where the FLUN can come together, is saying, this is what the value is. And we can work with the conservation groups and other groups that have got the energy and the resources to do the budgetary bit. Say, this is the level of funding, gets you these outcomes. Put your money here, but also if you do it well and do the food system well, you're going to save billions on the NHS. And we have social prescribing rather than medical prescribing. And think about the access to land in a different way and the access to healthy food that the government needs to invest in to get the right things.
Would anyone else like to comment on winning the access to funding?
I think I'd support what Martin says. I feel, of course funding is very important, but I think more important and far more difficult to tackle is the fact that the way government is set up, the way we're set up as society, is that we deal with things in little blibs and blobs. And actually, wouldn't it be just so refreshing to have a government that comes in and says, we can actually see that food, farming, the environment and our own good human health, they're all the same thing. And that it's dealt with from a top-down, cabinet-led body, and actually then the money that goes to farming would be minuscule compared to the benefit of, in health to us all as a nation, in clear-up costs to the environment. We spend a fortune on clearing up after our food production. The SFT did a report which showed for every £1 we spend on food, we spend £1 clearing up the mess in creating the food. If only we could create a political system where people were given, there was an ability for long-term action and really innovative thinking. And we just haven't got that. And I think what's so despairing really at the moment is that basically this government, in my view, has totally messed up. And I don't have much hope that the political system is going to deliver a Labour government that's going to be very different. And we're just grinding along on the same tracks, and we've somehow got to break out of that. It means a reformation of our political system, which is beyond hope. So, you know, it's naive to say that, but we shouldn't start. We can start voicing those views, and maybe in 10 or 20 years' time, they might try and reach the surface. But, you know, I think you just have to put it out there and say that these things are so wrong at the moment.
It's also important to not just think about getting funding out of government, but to think of ways that we can balance it out by earning money through looking at it as a whole, looking at the whole food system. And I did mention before, you know, if there's regulation and taxation, if people have to pay if they're using loads of nitrate fertilizer or they're causing pollution through the polluter pays principle, that actually earns money. If there's a tariff on things coming into the country, that earns money. And there could be ways that we could start to balance that out, where you're taking it from places where it'll actually level the playing field if you get that money, and putting it into the right things and reinvesting it in other ways. And some of that circular thinking needs to happen with the whole food and farming system. Everything thought about as an integrated whole.
Thank you very much. Right. Let's have some questions. If there's anyone, first of all, on the upper level who would like to ask questions, step to the mic and I will come to you when you've made your way over so you don't have to do a walk of shame. But who, on the bottom level, can we get a microphone to, first of all? Yes, the red jumper.
Hello, I'm Dan the Can you hear me? I'm Dan the Plan, as in town planner. So I'm a member of the Royal Town Planning Institute. You can't join unless you've done the right course and qualifications. But taking up the chairman's challenge, you could all join the Town and Country Planning Association. So they plan, but they plan for town and country together. It costs very little. NGOs can join, individuals can join, and they have good contacts in central government. So today I was really pleased to hear John Gummer say, for the first time on the stage, he mentioned the planning system. This conference, I've been coming to this conference for 15 years. That's the first time I've heard a speaker on the main stage talking about planning. It's all very well talking about horticultural dwellings down the road, but what we're talking about is the land use planning system for this country. You all come along for 2 days and talk about it. What you should be doing is working for the other 363 days on your land use planning system, and your best access to it is the TCPA.
Do you have a question, sir?
Has anybody joined it?
2.
Excellent, Jyoti, fantastic.
We're building a movement step by step. All right, I can see a person here with their hand up.
Thank you, John Harold, to Plant Life. We had announcements yesterday on payment rates through ELM, and as Plant Life and other organisations in the room, it'd be hard not to welcome those, but they do reveal a rather stark problem. If we're offering £1,000 a hectare for, let's say, floodplain meadows, we've got 3,000 hectares of floodplain meadows and a target of 74,000 hectares. The truth is, we can't afford to incentivise our way to the nature recovery that we need. We simply can't afford it. Scotland and Wales have just announced, reduced, real terms, reduced agriculture budgets. We can't afford it. So, as a panel, if you're advising a future government, would you advise them to, instead of spending the, that part of the agriculture budget on options payments per hectare, would you advise them to spend it all on an improved advisory support, peer-to-peer support service to transform, to support the transition of agriculture? Or would you advise them to use it for a guaranteed minimum income scheme for farmers?
Training and support or minimum income or an option C.
Can I ask first, because is there anyone from DEFRA in here? Right, let's be open and honest then. They've gone and done a pick and mix that has no framework of delivery, and many farmers are going to jump in and take a whole load of money out and deliver bugger all, really. And I think it's wrong in a way that nature only needs, say, 6% for birdseed mixes, 8% for flowers in a landscape. Why should farmers put the whole farm into various schemes that will deliver? It deliver nature recovery, but not at the scale, because it's over-delivering. There is no framework. They've gone too far the other way. And some of these payments are generous to the extreme, which actually are going to lock out access to land. And I see many farmers looking at it as a retirement package. They can lock it in. So we need to make sure that it has a framework, and we need to make sure DEFRA steps up. They are very, very well aware, because we've been telling them for a while. And they are looking at doing advice to make ambitious changes happen. They've scaled back on HLS agreements. They used to do 3,000. They did about 500 this year. There's many farmers want to do a whole farm approach, and they're not approaching it in a whole farm system. So the advice is going to have to happen. If we go back to the war, after the war, every farm drive had a government advisor go down their drive to tell them to increase food production and output. And now we need to flip it right back round, and how do we balance a whole farm approach in delivering different outcomes? And for some, I'm in Cambridgeshire, I can produce a good ton of wheat, and most years, a profitable thing. The public good money I should be receiving should be actually a bit less, because the market should reward me. And as an apple farmer, I can get a lot out of these schemes. I can really put my feet up. It's going to be great if I want to be silly at it. But what we don't see is where that public goods money should be meant to be going up the hill. Because though many farmers in less productive landscapes are going to have to receive public goods money, because their output will be public goods and less food production, but the animals and the food will still be there, but the balance of outputs will be different. And it's about having enough of an income coming in from all landscapes to keep the generation of the farmer there to deliver the outcomes. So it's a bit worrying.
A comment on minimum income, because that wasn't touched on?
No, it's not. It's actually on farmer-to-farmer learning, picking up on Martin's point. So, Martin, I can understand that you're glad that DEFRA's not in the room, but I wish they were in the room to hear what I'm going to say, because I actually think the key to this, and when we had this session with plant life, so with my PFLA hat on, I think absolutely key to change. Money is important, but key to change is changing what's going on up here and mindset change. And as a farmer, so I've been farming for 40 years this year, and we've, all the way through our lives, farming lives, we have made changes, but the most fundamental changes have happened probably in the last 10 years when I've got in with Pasture for Life, and we have a completely different approach to our farming, which means that we're reducing all of our inputs, we're seeing diversity coming back onto the farms, and if I have a problem now on the farm, I don't think, what can I go and buy, or what piece of machinery can I do to sort it out? I think, how can I sort this out with my livestock? And with the last thing is I don't want to go and buy anything if I possibly can, because that's cutting into my profit. So I actually think mindset change is absolutely critical, and we could achieve so much if the government would support that. And it's not supporting it through advisors. So we know that farmers are very sceptical about advisors. It's farmers supporting farmers, and in order for that to happen, we, Pasture for Life, have been running now for 2 years, the most phenomenally successful, we call it a mentoring project. It's been funded through FIPL, basically as a project manager, and people within the region, it's in the protected landscapes, they volunteer to become mentors, to offer open days for their farms, and they get paid for it. That's the big difference. We as farmers are probably happy to have as many people who want to come to our farms, but actually under this scheme we get paid to do some mentoring for farming. It's very cheap for the government to deliver, but as a farmer you feel it's nice being paid. I actually like being paid for what I do. It's the only time I'm ever paid for anything I actually do. And I think that the government, they should just roll out these schemes to just get the farmers to set them up themselves in their areas, have a project manager to manage it, and the events and the community that we have built in the last 2 years in the southeast, which is where I live, through this scheme, has been phenomenal. And I wouldn't have made changes to my farming if I hadn't been part of that. You know, it's really supportive. So I think you can do so much so cheaply, but they just don't seem to hear.
Shall we take another? Or?
Yeah, we do support income support for farmers. Yeah, that's something that's quite important to make sure there's a minimum income level for farmers.
Isn't that stopping bad businesses failing, though?
Stopping bad business. Well, I think a lot of times when you're doing it right, it's difficult to make a living within the current market forces and the economy, the way it's all set up. And no farmer should go without basic needs. And a lot of farmers, when they're getting set up, particularly new entrants, the tax credit system, when it was in place, was an incredibly useful thing for many, many small agroecological farms trying to get started, to be able to provide a steady income for people often living in really, simple circumstances. A lot of people in caravans, a lot of people in, all sorts of accommodation, because rural housing is very difficult to afford. And now, especially with the onset of Airbnb everywhere, and all the cottages in villages being Airbnb'd out, or wealthy people moving in because people can remotely work, it's very, very difficult to get accommodation for rural workers, and particularly for farmers when the economics don't really stack up for farming systems that are doing the right thing. So, I think we really have to have some sort of income safety net there. But I think we need to be designing it really carefully, just to make sure that farmers aren't just spending any profit they got on a new Land Rover in order to show that their income at a low level and then benefiting from a financial system that way. But I think we could, with a lot of creativity, make sure we could do that. And also a cap on payments. And I think that's something we need to think more about, having an upper level limit on payments. And maybe that's controversial with people here, but it could also help, make sure that the money's going to the people who really need it.
Okay, thank you.
Some questions then. I'm Professor Steve Newman. So firstly, don't you think the real problem in all this is the complete disconnect between the public and producers and farmers? Absolutely extreme in this country, far more than in any other country in the world. And on that basis, is the government, are we asking the government to do too much? Are they fit for purpose to solve the problem? So these are the two very important questions. And the third question is kind of a proposal. I think what would be really good would be to give citizens food vouchers that could be traced, so they could learn from what. So in a local community, you could give more vouchers to poorer people if you wanted a more socially informed process, and they can cash these vouchers in with the local producers, to farms, to say, well, look, it'd be great if you could provide my meat or whatever, but also I'd like to be able to walk the dog and visit your farm, whatever they want. They've got a voucher, they've got their own currency, which they could spend to the producers, then the producers could cash that in. So that's bringing a contact between the public and the producers. It's also an incredible, powerful thing, and we've done this in Africa in many occasions, to actually trace real good policy ideas and to learn what are the flows, where are the real demands. So we carefully avoid people like supermarkets and different vested interests. This is a way that the public can directly inform policy, and you can solve some of the social and environmental problems at the same time.
Okay. Robert, does the Real Farming Trust work with businesses who predominantly would be speaking directly to the public, and is that something that you talk about in that organisation?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, I think it's a big problem. And one thing we want to see a lot more, along with everybody else on this panel, is much more local food economies, where people are trading with their local farmers. Farmers are producing food for their local communities, which is really, really important. That sort of economic democracy, I think, is really, really important. But, the actual comms of communicating with the public about the food, it's such a huge thing, isn't it? And the funding that it would require, it's very difficult, and we're all very, very small organisations. So it's hard to get that direct line into the public. But we do need that.
So I'm doing lots of things with agroforestry across the entire UK. So they're already doing it. So through the agroforestry stuff that we're working on, we talk to the farmers, and there are two camps. Some say, yeah, we're still stuck into this commodity world, you know, we're trying to produce bulk things and we're dealing with supermarkets, we're in a real problem. Others say, well, we've got it. We're now farming the public. We're now farming people. That's the future. We're connecting with local people. We're responding. We never knew what they really wanted. We always made assumptions because we go through middlemen, you know, middle players. So there are some incredible farmers already plugged in, making a substantial amount of their income from servicing the needs of the community.
If we reflect on where we are, or have been, we have told public to get off the land as farmers. We're going to receive your public money and you're going to buy your food over there in the shop. So we've, as an industry, and I'm not proud to see that's what's happened, we have actually driven the people off the land to go and buy the food over there, and now we need to reconnect. And all these organisations, and lots of organisations that are here, are in that mode of reconnecting people back to land and food and other stuff we engage with. And that's the only way we're going to have power in the future as farmers, by connecting with people so they can reward us in a range of outputs we can get, and they need to know where their food comes and how it's been produced.
I mean, I have great sympathy with the feeling that it'd be good to get more people to come onto farms. I mean, we do a lot of direct sales from our farm, and I really enjoy having people coming to the farm. But it's very hard work. Many farmers don't want to do that, and possibly don't have the skills to do that. I mean, it's a very particular skill to produce your meat and then to get it all packaged up and dealing with the customers, and it's a very particular skill and hard work. So I think it'd be lovely to have more of that going on, but it's not going to be a panacea in the big picture. And I mean, I'm just going to quickly give another quick blast to CLEAR, because one of the things we know is that the British public do not trust the food labelling system at the moment, because the food labelling system is being done by the food producers, and there's hundreds and hundreds of labels out there. It's totally meaningless. And I think that if we can develop trust for the consumer, so we have what CLEAR is actually asking for, which I probably haven't said, is that we think there should be a mandatory method of production labelling system, which means that data from the farms right through the processing system goes into the labels. It's not top down, it's bottom up, and it's independently run. It's not generated by the food manufacturers. So I think it comes back to trust, which Robert was talking about with farmers, and trust for the consumer is really important too. It's so hard as a consumer to know what to choose when you're shopping in a supermarket, and we have to break that lack of trust down and build up the trust again. And by doing that, we would start to connect those people who can't get out to farms for whatever reason, can't meet the farmer. There'd be that little bit of connection and a little bit more understanding about how their food has been produced.
Okay. Do you mind if I move on? Okay. I think I win a prize because I understand that I've got the first question of the day from the upper level. So go for it.
Thank you so much. Hello, this is Anna from Stanmore Organics. We're based in the South Downs. Sorry for the echo. Thank you, panelists, for the work you do in your daily lives and for being here today. And thank you for the conference organizers for this amazing space. I wanted to come back to a point that Martin made around the urgency and the opportunity right now to influence government and policy making. I think we have this short time window. I would love to hear reflections on how this plethora of organizations that is gathering here could come together to jointly, to coordinate advocacy work and to really join forces. I've been trying to straddle the two conferences going on in the same space. I think it's extremely important that dialogue is happening. Curious about opportunities for that as well. But, anyway, I think there's, increasing tenancy security for farms, access to farms, but also allowing us to innovate ways of how we value land so that we don't lose value when we start regenerating. All these are really big picture questions that will be coming up on the plate. How can we coordinate? How can we join forces? Thank you.
Thank you. Is FLUN looking for more members?
Yeah.
And what do you have to believe to be a member?
So it'd be a farming body, so as we've got some represented here, it is about bringing those farmer voices together and land manager voices can demonstrate. So let's talk about those clear asks as organisations. So if any organisation wants to get involved, or groups, talk to myself, talk to Robert, who's the secretariat of it. How can we collectively do things? But we also need to remember, as the network, we've been very fortunate to get some very good access in. And how do we use that opportunity of being able to sit in rooms and meet people and talk to people to influence that? Because we can't shout from outside. We get shut out of rooms. We need to find ways in. And through FLUN, we have a fortunate position to be in that space. And that's why, collectively, how can we have those conversations over the next few months and work out where do we need to push those buttons and what do we ask for? So collectively, come together, and then through FLUN, we can really make a difference.
Josie, when was the last time you banged your fist on a table and stormed out of a meeting room? Is it ever the right time?
I haven't done that, actually. I stick with it.
So you'd agree with Martin. It's better to be in the room where it happens.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I saw something very moving at the climate change talks when all of the young people in the room all stood up together and turned their backs and walked out en masse. And I think things like that are very powerful. And I think, we need to realize that the system that we're working in isn't really designed to benefit our basic human rights, but we can still hold it accountable, and that means staying in the room and trying our damned best to get through in any way we can. And making sure that we all act as food citizens, that we learn as much as we can about the food system, and we stand up for our basic human rights. And, I was going to stick in a little plug here and throw in a little curveball to stand up for those who are not in this room and who are very marginalized within our food system here in the UK, which is the migrant workers. And thinking about migrant labour on our farms, we've just done an investigation, which you can pick up at our Landworkers Alliance stall, called Debt, Migration and Exploitation in the Food Sector. And it looks at how migrant labourers are treated here in the UK and the exploitation that they face. And I think alongside, standing up for good, healthy access to food for all of ourselves and future generations, we need to think about the food workers and the farmers who have the most marginalized voice here and make sure that they are protected within our food system as well. And think about, future migration here and holding those opportunities, because, when we think about the migration that's going to happen planet-wise, 1.6 billion climate refugees expected in the next 10 years, 1.6 billion. That's a lot of people that will need employment and looking after within our global system. And so we have a responsibility to make sure that they're not exploited and where our food system works. Many of those will be from Africa, trying to come across to the south of Spain, where our tomatoes are produced, to Italy, in Morocco, in those places. And because there will be so many, there's going to be high rates of exploitation. And I think we need to think about their supply chains and think about who's not in the room and protect their interests as well.
Okay, there's a question down here. Yes, please.
It's interesting.
All right.
It was interesting. They're talking about advisors. I've just been in New Zealand, where they took subsidies away some time ago, and the countryside is emptied. There's so many empty houses, schools closed and everything. They do get advisors. They get quite a lot of money for all sorts of research and stuff. But it has meant that the percentage of people working in agriculture has drastically gone down. It's actually less than here, even though you think it's a country that's very agricultural. There's actually less people working in agriculture as a percentage than here. And so I think, yes, we do want advice and help in this plethora of complication that is the new system. Like, I can only apply for SFI on 1/10 of my farm. I can't apply for anything on the rest of it because I'm an upland farmer. And it's a drip, like Martin said, it's a drip thing that's really annoyed everybody, and there's just no trust left, really, and people are just completely fed up.
Martin, New Zealand, obviously a very different situation. There was a shorter transition, but the statistics from the Farmers Weekly survey and the sort of from knowing farmers as you and all the panellists do you think there is going to be a cliff edge because people aren't preparing adequately, and could we see a bit of countryside depletion?
I'm seeing a sector of the industry who are not aware what's coming down the road and are not planning for a business that meets the future needs. And they're investing high amounts of capital investment now. They think it's going to be right for 10 years and 20 years' time, and it's not. They're going to have stranded assets. And they've got their head in the sand, and they want to carry on farming as they were. But I see a huge amount of people that are really engaged, some really leading farmers and lots that are really getting engaged. And it's how do we facilitate those conversations to help everybody see this journey. And unfortunately, there will be some people who lose out because they're stubborn enough not to want to engage. And I get people phoning me up and giving me hassle about where I want to keep my BPS. BPS left a week ago.
Yeah.
Plan your business in what we need, what you can see on the horizon, what we need to do with the climate impacts that are coming to us, and we're not going to stop those, so you've got to build resilience in your business to manage in the future. But I do think it's really hopeful. I've got a real hope in what we could be able to achieve, but it's going to be challenging because we're going to have so many different actors coming at us, food prices, input prices, market price, and how do we plan a business with less risk? That means stop buying loads of inputs. Manage the landscape in the capacity it has rather than trying to push capacity. And that's a very different business model to what many are currently operating in.
Fidelity.
I think the other point which one should reflect on is that it's an incredibly complex situation now for farmers, and many farmers are not equipped to do that. I suspect in farming there's probably a higher rate of dyslexia, a higher rate of poor education where people have always known they're going to go into farming. You know, it's incredibly complicated now accessing all the information. I know of many farmers who don't have computers, perhaps have poor broadband. So I think it's quite harsh, Martin, your approach to them. It's their fault, because actually it's...
I'm not saying it is their fault, and that's why we need to help them, because there's 320-odd different schemes to enter now.
Yeah.
5 years ago, we had BPS, stewardship, and a market price. And that's how we've got to help them. And that's the role of the network and other organisations, is to communicate that of how can we help you. As someone who's dyslexic myself, that ability to understand and translate, I need help for.
Yeah.
And that's how the role of all of us is to help those people.
Well, you're an amazing example of somebody who's able to go out there and ask for help. There'll be plenty of farmers who actually find that, just that very thing of asking for help, very difficult. So it's, you know, it's compounding a difficult situation with the fact that we have farmers who are probably not well equipped to deal with this changing situation.
I just long for the days when we could have come to these places and just talked about cows, really. But it seems to be over, doesn't it? We've got time for one more question. Yes, a very enthusiastic hand here with the white jacket.
Hi, Lana Weston. I was just looking up the top 4 issues for voters for the next election, and the first is the cost of living, second is NHS, third the economy, and finally climate change. How can we make sure that the issues you've discussed today all relate back into those really important issues for voters so that we can get food and farming on the agenda for the next election?
Okay, a sentence each on how we push food and farming up the agenda. Is that okay? Let's start with you, JT.
I think central to the idea of promoting agroecological food and access to it for all is to address the cost of living one, because that is what people are very concerned about. And if we continue to make our message about, you know, it being more expensive to access good food, then it's not going to win voters over in any way. People want access to the food, but they want to be able to afford it. And so we need to address that in how we put all this forward and link it all together with the solution to the climate crisis and access to healthy food for future generations as well. Make those messages really clear that this is something for everyone to get involved in and that will be able to afford it. It's not some niche, exclusive, marginal issue.
Robert, how do we get Herefordshire voters voting along these sort of lines for these sort of issues?
Yeah, it's really challenging, isn't it? Because there are so many issues to deal with at the moment, and inequality is right up there. But I think climate change and biodiversity loss is really, really important. And I think people are starting to realise, and businesses are starting to realise, and other organisations, that food and farming sector is a huge contributor to emissions and a huge opportunity for mitigation of those emissions. So I think there is huge opportunity around that. It is the fourth one, is it, climate change? But I think there's opportunity there, and biodiversity loss, which I think everybody is really worried about and passionate about, because it is still happening.
Thank you. Fidelity.
I think I'd ban ultra-processed food. If I was the government, I'd ban ultra-processed food, say that all food sellers must only sell raw ingredients, get cooking being taught in schools and family, and just force us all to start to eat and access really nice, wholesome food. They'd save loads of money on all sorts of clear-up issues. I think the government could make a profit out of that. We'd have a healthier population. It's a doddle. I mean, they could just do it.
Easy. Just like that. Just send a copy of Delia Smith's How to Cook to every household. Martin, final word.
For me, I think it's getting farmers to demonstrate they can tackle and deliver climate solutions, they can tackle and deliver our biodiversity, and producing food from healthy landscape delivers healthy people. And that's what we should be championing. That we have the solutions as farmers in changing our practices to deliver those things, and we need to talk about that so we are valued better within society of all the actions and deliveries we can do.
Can I just add one thing?
Briefly.
And we all need to eat, right? Everybody needs to eat. So, you know, and we've seen it recently with supermarket shelves not being fully stocked, and it's going to get worse, that. So, and I think that is a way. I mean, people are starting to recognise how important the food system is to your basic well-being and health.
All right, thank you very much. We've been discussing, the future government farming programme, but it's been about building a movement. So, and I think what we've learned today, there's huge frustration with government, but change doesn't just come from the top down, it does come from the bottom up. So the closing message for each of you here today is you've lost the right to moan unless you're doing something. Join an organisation you're passionate about, hopefully one that's allied to a bigger movement. It's an opportunity this year with the election. Let's all do our bit to keep food farming and climate change high on the agenda. Please thank all of my panellists.